I've really been fed with the joy of the Lord here tonight. Thank you for John, when you started tonight, you reminded us of the Godhead, of the Trinity, and especially as we consider it, and what I'm going to share with you tonight about what we know as the Incarnation. It's helped us to be prepared and to be reminded exactly what we are celebrating this time of the year. Thank you for the youth and the music, the devotion. Thank you for Angelina and your beautiful words. And I have a pretty good translator, so that was just wonderful. Thank you. I have prepared a text, and I'm going to get to that, and I want to try and keep to it because I know it's been translated for those who would like to have the translated version. I would like to say that a year from now, a Christmas miracle could be that I would be able to address you in Arabic. So there's something for you to pray for all this year. But I'm afraid we'll have to continue in English tonight. But it really is a privilege to be able to do so this time of year. So I'm going to just refer to my text and try and keep to it. We'll be looking at two scriptures, actually, the beginning of John's Gospel, what we call the prologue, and also part of Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 2. But I'll let you know when we get to those verses. So I'll begin the text that I prepared. About 70 years ago, C.S. Lewis, who some of you will be familiar with his Narnia series, he was a great writer, an English literature professor. He said three things about Christmas in terms of what we refer to. First of all, a religious holiday, the birth of Christ, what we're celebrating tonight. A popular holiday, an occasion for merrymaking and hospitality. And then, thirdly, a commercial affair with a clever syndrome of advertising designed to pressure the unwary into a spending spree. So as we prepare for another Christmas and look out into our culture, there's no doubt that C.S. Lewis and what he referred to the commercial aspect of the name Christmas predominates. Yes, we do like to get together and make merry over a meal and some drinks. We just enjoyed that together. That's wonderful. But if we're really honest, we know that the pressure to bend to the world around us and get caught up in the slick advertising gimmicks of Christmas, this really does consume the world around us, and it's easy for us, of course, to get caught up into it. Now, what C.S. Lewis referred to as the religious festival of the birth of Christ, it's still tolerated in our culture, but it's certainly not the main event. Even for those of us who acknowledge that Jesus is the reason for the season, we so easily can get caught up in all the Christmas hype and soon become so fatigued by it all that we have little energy left to devote to finding and experiencing Jesus at Christmas. So tonight, what I'd like to suggest we do is, in order to escape the commercial Christmas trap and embrace in a fresh way what it means that God is with us, Emmanuel, we're going to set aside, just for a little bit, the word Christmas. I know it's a good word and it has lots of history behind it, but I'd like us to consider another word, and we've already considered it here tonight through what has been shared in the devotion by John and the young people, and through the music, through the words of the songs. We've already done that. But the word is incarnation. And we'll have to consider also looking at some other Gospels. What I mean is that we're going to have to leave Matthew and Luke, and we'll look at the Gospel of John. And when we do, we'll find that there's no mention of the virgin birth. There's no mention of Mary and Joseph, the shepherds, the wise men. But what we do discover in John is something very profound, and it will help us to understand the actual physical circumstances around Jesus' birth. Of course, what we read in Luke and Matthew's Gospels. Truly, to read the first 14 verses of John is a necessary companion to the read of Matthew and Luke's stories of the first Christmas. What is laid out for us by John in his first 14 or so verses is what is known as the prologue, and we can refer to it as incarnational spirituality. It's a big word, but if we just think about incarnation, the Word became flesh. Let that be our focus. So I'm going to read the first 5 verses of John, and I've broken down what we can refer to as the incarnation of spirituality into 3 sections. And the first one, God being united with us, God being united with humans. So I'll read John 1, verses 1 to 5. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. Now, in the Old Testament, God spoke by his word through his messengers. We have that in the Bible, especially when we get to the prophets. And Isaiah, especially this time of year, we have lots of God speaking through his word, through his written word, as spoken through the prophets, through the writers of the Old Testament. We have that. But what John is now explaining to us is that the Word has come to life, has become flesh, incarnate. And we discover that the Word which was with God in the beginning, as John explained in the Godhead, it's going to have a name. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was with the Father at creation. That's really important. And John mentioned that Jesus, who is the Word that's become flesh, become man, was with the beginning, with God in the beginning, at creation, was part of the creative time. So Jesus was born, he was from the very beginning, and now has come to earth in the form of a man, but also holding on to his divinity, fully man, but fully God. And that's the mystery for us, but in accepting it by faith, it's a beautiful gift. And we're asked to do that. This is a mystery, but one we must accept. It's a new way of God communicating with creation. All this, of course, is God's initiative. This is the important point here, that this is what God is doing. We're not in the scene here yet. This is God's initiative. God is being united with his creation, with humans. The Word that becomes flesh is both light and life. And as John tells us, nothing will be able to extinguish this light that has come into the world. God is uniting himself with his creation. So secondly, I'm going to read now verses 9 to 13. The second point, humans united with God. So first of all, God has taken the initiative, uniting himself with humans. And now there's a call for a response. Let me read verses 9 to 13. 1 John. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. God has made himself known and has invited us to respond. So what does it mean? Well, yes, the light and life, the Word made flesh, that is Jesus, is seeking our response. John tells us here that not everyone wanted to know Jesus. And even today it's true. We know that. Not everyone is wanting to receive Jesus as the living Word that is known to us. Not everyone may be interested in receiving life and light through Jesus. But, and here is the wonderful good news, as John tells us, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. So what does this mean for us? It means that as we receive Jesus into our hearts, we become children of God. We are united with God through his Son, Jesus Christ. And if we are children of God, we become heirs of all God's wonderful promises for his children. Now, one of the most beautiful promises of God is that we can be at peace. First of all, we can have peace with God. Billy Graham once said many years ago that the greatest war in all of history is a war between man and God. You see, if we do not accept Jesus as God's only begotten Son who came to earth to save us and to redeem us and to offer us life and light, then we have to be against God. We are at war with him. But if we choose to surrender our will and ask Jesus to forgive us and to remember everything that he's done for us on the cross, even though we're at Christmas and we're talking about Jesus coming into the world, we can never push the cross aside. The cross has to be central even now at Christmas. Because we know that the baby Jesus did not stay in the manger. But he grew up. He had a ministry. He was faithful unto death. Death on a cross. So this is part of the gift here. That in receiving the peace of God, we accept what God has done for us through Jesus on the cross. Now, this peace, of course, is in our hearts when we receive Jesus, when we ask for his forgiveness and ask him to take that central place in our hearts. This word peace, of course, we know shows up a lot at Christmas time. We see it on Christmas cards. We hear it sung about in songs. Peace on earth, goodwill towards men. Now, why is this? Well, one of the reasons, it's a beautiful reason, of course, is that we can go back into one of the texts in the prophet Isaiah, chapter 9 in particular, and one of the messages about the coming Messiah was that he would be referred to as Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. This Prince of Peace is Jesus, and this Christmas he offers us his peace. Will we accept this gift? Now, it doesn't matter who we are and what we've done, how much money we have or don't have. It doesn't matter our status in life, because it's a free gift. We can't go out and buy it. Another place in Isaiah, he talks about the free gift, and we can't buy it, and we only need to receive it. So the invitation is for us, even here tonight, is to turn to Jesus, to receive this gift, this beautiful gift, that we can't go out in the stores and buy. We can't find it anywhere else except within our own hearts, by receiving what he's done for us, his life and death, going to the cross for us. And as Billy Graham said years ago, that this is the gift of peace. We can be at peace, first of all, with God, and then a beautiful thing happens. We are filled, just as we experience here tonight. It's an experience of joy. But more than that, it's a peace that allows us then to reach out and be at peace with the world. And that's something you cannot buy anywhere. Peace with God, and then being at peace with one another. Some churches, my tradition, for example, at a certain point in the service, before we have communion together, it's a symbolic act, but it's very, very meaningful. We share the peace of Christ with one another when we go around and greet one another in the peace of Christ. And we do that before we receive communion to ensure that perhaps there is someone in our midst that we've been having difficulty with, and before we receive communion, we want to make sure that, yes, we're at peace with God, but we want to be at peace with our neighbor. And that's the promise here. As we receive peace with God, we're no longer fighting God. We can reach out and see our neighbors, see our family members, see the ones around us in a new light. It is the light of Christ. It's the peace of Christ coming into our hearts and flowing out so that we can be at peace with the world. Now, the third point, it's just one verse in John, and I've referred to it as incarnational living, or living the incarnation every day. Verse 14 in John's first chapter. So the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. So God has made himself known to us. The Word has become flesh, dwelling among us, and we've accepted the gift to become his child, to be his heir. So what's next? What do we do with it? In this verse, John draws our attention to the glory of God. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, glory, when we think about glory in the Old Testament, it appeared in various ways, been associated with the Shekinah glory of God. We see it, for example, in the story of Exodus, as the people of God were led from Egypt through the wilderness into the promised land. By day there was a big cloud that guided them. And then by night it was like a fire, some miraculous fire in the sky. And so this was what's known as the glory of God. It was a visible presence in a certain phenomenon. But now, John tells us the glory is in Jesus that has been made known to us in flesh. So what can we do with this? What does this mean for us? Well, if we accept Jesus into our hearts and as his child, It means that we too can radiate his light, his glory, in some way that makes his presence or his glory known to the world around us. I love the way that N.T. Wright, a popular Christian writer and theologian, used to be a bishop in my tradition. Here's what he says when we think about the glory of Christ now. The love which he incarnate, by which we are saved, is to become the love which fills us beyond capacity and flows out to heal the world, so that the Word may become flesh once more and dwell not just among us, but within us. Having beheld his glory, we must reveal his glory. Glory as of the beloved children of the Father, full of grace and truth. So we are called to go out and to share this glory. Recently I read about a challenge that Christians could undertake at Christmas. You could call it the Christmas calling. It's all about taking on humility as a way of life. Now, in order to explain this further, I want to leave John for a minute. We're going to refer to Paul's letter to the Philippians in chapter 2, and we'll look at some verses there for a minute. In my Bible, it's referred to the humility of Christ. Imitating the humility. Let me just read I'll just read the first 5 verses to begin. And this is Paul writing to the church in Philippi. Of course, it's a letter to us as well. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Now this is the key verse here, next 2 verses actually. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. So he goes on to quote a hymn here. I'm going to read this hymn because here you see the fullness of what Christ has done for us. Not just coming into the world, but also going to the cross for us. So continuing verse 5, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So Paul's urging here is to be like Christ in everything. Of course, especially in our human relationships, how we treat one another. This is a big challenge. Of course, it's a virtue that does not come natural to us, but what Paul is reminding us here is not in our own strength. This has to be through the power of Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of Jesus working through us. That's the key. That's the promise. Will we receive it, and will we act upon it? We know that the opposite to humility is vanity. And we're probably a little reluctant to call ourselves vain, but the truth is that we mostly put ourselves first. Then there's arrogance, which could also be considered an opposite of humility. Arrogant people insist on their way. They act in an overbearing and argumentative, opinionated, and obstinate way. But think for a moment. What a world it would be if everyone would put on humility instead. Can you imagine a world like that? Well, we know it's probably not going to come to pass in the power of the world or the power of humanity. We know that. But, and here's the challenge, if as followers of Jesus, even this Christmas starting, we could, embracing all that Jesus has done for us, the incarnation, and becoming children of God, and we take up this challenge, become more humble. And then perhaps the grace of God, the glory of God, which is the presence of God in the world, would shine through just a little stronger this Christmas and every day. It's a big challenge. But prayerfully, can we work towards it? We know that the light of Jesus will shine. God will be faithful to his promise through his Son, Jesus. And he will make himself known through us as we surrender our will to his. Now, Christmas can be a time to hear stories, and there are many classics in this regard, and we each have our favorites. Some of these stories we know have been made into movies, and they're fun to watch, and they have good messages. Everyone does love a good story, so I hope you enjoy this one and see the relevance to our thoughts tonight, our thoughts, our celebration of what we've had through music and words of devotion, hopefully through this message as well. And it could maybe touch our hearts through the way that it was written. Now, you may have heard this story. I've heard it a number of times, but it was first really made public 20 years ago by an American broadcaster. He was with ABC at the time. He's since passed away. His name was Paul Harvey. And he had a wonderful voice, one of those voices that you could listen to, and a voice of authority, like a father's voice, a voice of comfort. And he read this on the radio in Christmas Eve 2004. Listen to the story. Now, the man to whom I'm going to introduce you was not a Scrooge. He was a kind, decent, mostly good man, generous to his family, upright in his dealings with others. But he just didn't believe all that incarnation stuff, which the churches proclaim at Christmas. It just didn't make sense, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. He just couldn't swallow the Jesus story about God coming to earth as a man. I'm truly sorry to distress you, he told his wife, but I'm not going with you tonight to the Christmas Eve service at church. He said that if he did, he'd feel like a hypocrite. He said he would stay at home and wait up for them. And so he stayed, and they went to the midnight Christmas service. Shortly after the family drove away in the car, snow began to fall. He went to the window to watch the flurries getting heavier and heavier, and went back to his fireside chair and began to read his newspaper. Minutes later, he was startled by a thudding sound. Then another and another. At first he thought that someone must be throwing snowballs against the window. But when he went to the front door to investigate, he found a flock of birds huddled miserably in the snow. They had been caught in a storm, and in a desperate search for shelter had tried to fly through his large living room window. Well, he couldn't let the poor creatures lie there and freeze. So he remembered the barn where his children stored the pony. That would provide a warm shelter, he thought, only if he could direct the birds to it. So quickly he got on his coat, boots, hat, and gloves and tramped through the deepening snow to the barn. He opened the barn door wide and turned on the light inside. But the birds did not come in. So he hurried back to the house and got some breadcrumbs, sprinkled them in the snow, making a trail to the yellow lighted wide open doorway to the stable. But to his dismay, the birds ignored the breadcrumbs and continued to flap around helplessly in the snow. He tried shooing them into the barn by walking around and waving his arms. Instead, they scattered in every direction, thinking that he was some kind of creature, and because they were afraid. He realized that they were afraid of him. To them, he reasoned, I'm a strange and terrifying creature. If only I could think of some way to let them know that they can trust me, that I am not trying to hurt them, but to help them. But how? If only I could be a bird, he thought to himself, and mingle with them and speak their language. Then I could tell them not to be afraid. Then I could show the way to the safe, warm barn. But I would have to be one of them, so they could see and understand. At that moment, the church bells began to ring. The sound reached his ears above the sounds of the wind, and he stood there listening to the bells. Oh, come, all ye faithful. Listening to the bells pealing the glad tidings of Christmas, he sank to his knees in the snow. Merry Christmas.